got to come up with a better diagram than that.
I think I found some library that makes this. What are these dot files, or what are these diagrams called?
It's written in dot. I keep thinking you should just. I need to figure out spend the time to move it to
Ye-
Monterey since that's.
Yeah, so I had found a library which makes these dot files really pretty. I forgot that library, but you write it in here, but the output is much prettier than the default one.
Oh, well, if you remember that, you should shoot that DM to me or
Yeah,
drop it in infrastructure.
yeah.
All right, commits has joined. So we do have one person who can provide like a somewhat more cold view of the architecture. But yeah, commits. To catch you up, we're kind of like doing a review brainstorm of our infrastructure and trying to think about what might be added to it. What are some good directions for it? So, what's the 2.0 version of the infrastructure?
Awesome. Thanks.
All right. Why don't we get started? And I think I'm looking at this page after a pretty long time, and it's actually not quite as clear to me as I thought it was. Because you guys have like built out a lot more back end than I thought. So maybe a good way to start might actually be, since you're here, Nathan, maybe you can like provide like a very short guided tour of the page of the current state. And then what I thought we could do was kind of like switch into product manager kind of hat and think from the point of view of if this were a product, what should it evolve to? But let's start with like kind of a state of the thing.
Yeah, so I think that it's very much grown up organically over time, and so I think there's sort of two big nexes that don't really come out well. Diagram. One is the website and things related to building the website and aggregating data and putting that together, which is I think where I've spent most of my headspace, and most of that is kind of on sort of the upper left quadrant of the diagram. It's a Netlify and then some related services around that, GitHub, and then there are things related to Discord, which is mostly on sort of the lower quarter of the diagram. Though I think there's some interactions with some of the Google stuff that's in between the Netlify block. And Discord, that Mayor has been a lot more active with. That's very bot driven. And it kind of worked. The two universes don't talk to each other very much, which I think has been, there's been sort of a long term feeling that they need to talk to each other more. So that's definitely sort of a weakness. On the Discord side, which I think is maybe the more interesting one, and when Mayor gets out of listen mode, Mayor may want to correct me on some of this. All of the bots are hosted on a Vulture server. Not sure where the data center is for that. I think it might be in France. And are written in Python. And mostly they're stateless. I believe there's one that uses an SQLite backing store to track some state. And that's where the lists get generated and whatnot. But for the most part, they just sort of they respond or they pull data from Discord sort of as it exists at the moment. So there's not a lot, interactivity and sort of long-term tracking potential is limited currently, and that's also something that sort of can be expanded. On the website side, initially Initially, it was using GitHub Pages. We moved that to Netlify to have a little bit more flexibility there. So GitHub is still where all the content is stored, and then Netlify is where actually the build happens. It hosts some API, basically an API endpoint. There's a CDN that lets us push writings pages, so basically RSS feeds, and build out the writings page and the newsletter on the website. I think that's actually broken right now, and I figured out why, but I also time because I'm trying to move away from that infrastructure. If to actually move to a model where it's costing money, it's not a very high amount of money. I can get out of that, which also gets things flexible. So I've been currently working very, very slowly on trying to move some of this infrastructure back into GitHub Actions and have Actions doing a lot of things. That will potentially open up some space or more collaboration between the website and Discord. So not website related, but sort of as a side project. Very, very slowly, Mayor and I, which was helping me out this past Sunday, have been working on a thing called lunchtime tickets, which is just sort of a way to get tickets pushed into GitHub and posted on Discord and have a little bit more management around, what are the things that need to be done. That's actually automated in. That's not on the infrastructure map right now because it's sort of a new thing. But that's actually built off of GitHub Action in the back end. And then we're basically using that to run some Python scripts, or in some cases, just make direct calls to the API using the tool. Because what GitHub Actions is doing is it's spinning up a very short-lived container. So, kind of like a computer, not quite. And it's running these things. And so we have a limited tool set, but a fair amount of flexibility, and we have the ability to download some pre-compiled tools that we can't do full install. So it comes with its pluses and minuses, but it should be overall a more flexible system than some of the things we've been using with the website. And so it's possible, we probably can't host bots on it, but we can probably move a lot of automation to it and have a lot more with the automation if we start using NAC more as a backing store. Right now, member information is stored in NAC. One of the goals with me working on some of the website automation and GitHub Actions is start to pull like the RSS feed information from NAC so that everything is member updatable. If we start doing any on-chain stuff, we could potentially start pulling information much more easily through GitHub Actions into the website build process. So I think that's sort of promising direction we're going. It's not really distributed direction; it's actually more. It's almost more of a centralization direction. So I think that's the basic overview. There's some other things. We have the Google Calendar. We have YouTube that Anuraj manages mostly. Those all sort of stand alone. There is a bot that pulls information from a Google Calendar and gets that pushed into Discord. And we would like to get some integration between YouTube and the website during the build process. I haven't looked at that yet. Definitely. So I think that's, I guess, Twitter. There is a connection, a bot that lets Discord posts get pushed into Twitter. So that's an integration that stands right now. I don't think there's really any integrations around Facebook or LinkedIn, or really much that happens with those two accounts at all at the moment. So I think that's the overview. I can drill down if there are questions or cover a part in more detail if I'm forgetting something.
Thanks, Nathan. I think that's exactly the right level of overview we needed to remind us where we are. So just to frame the prompt a little more clearly, um, I'd like us to kind of like think with product manager hat on, as in if this were a whole thing were a product you were managing and you were building the next version of the product, what would you prioritize? What would you try to like make the core of the next iteration? And then we can sort of like do another round of comments on like, are there interesting no code or low code things or services that can actually be integrated and take us in that direction? But let's start with sort of product manager round, and also keeping in mind all the discussions we've been having lately about distributed systems. So, everything like junk space and distributed blockchainy things, all those things. Like so, as a product manager, think in distributed systems direction as sort of the general direction as well. So why don't we start with commits, then Grigory, and go down that direction? Commits.
Sure. So thanks for the overview, and the map, I have to say, is really impressive. It'd be nice to have some like key index on there for those colors, but it's really amazing that it all links back to Rome. I have to say, like the whole like how deep y'all have went with Rome as your database is pretty impressive. So okay, thinking about like the kind of things that currently exist and how to kind of what like the next version from like a product manager perspective might be. I think I don't know if this is really the right way of approaching this question, but one thing that I can sort of say from like the user experience side is I find the experience on Discord to be very cluttered, and I often feel like there's a couple things. Like one is like uh, it's nice to have the visibility of all of the like reading lists, and it's nice to have the like the ability to kind of port over messages and have them shown. But there's often a lot of like duplicated messages or like messages that'll like break up like a conversation that's been happening, and it's just like impossible to actually kind of track the conversation if you want to look back. Heaven forbid anyone spends any time scrolling up on Discord. But for those that do, it's just like if you're not like already embedded and active in the community, in the discussions here, it can be very alienating, which might be, a value, like a positive value. But I could imagine like maybe like having like a kind of like dedicated bot channel where you can sort of query these things and maybe even just like send like a small ping to another channel to say that it was queried and go look over here if you want to actually kind of see what was happening. So it's just like a one-liner interjection into the flow of the chat, but it's kind of has like there's like a junk space channel where all of that stuff is just thrown, and then it's just distributed across the Discord. So that's one thing. Another thing is that anytime that there's like embedded acts, like I've actually had to like totally mute all the notifications from the online governance channel because every time someone does a reading list prompt, I get a notification, like an at that's like embedded like in the middle of the sentence that someone tagged me in, and it's actually super annoying. And so like just like ways for people to opt out of that kind of thing. I mean, it's like a different level of like user experience polish, but that would be really great. I guess there are a couple other things. So there is I don't know if this is kind of starting to like, yeah, these things might be like more for like potential like future integration things, like different ideas for things that we could do. Yeah, it'd be nice to have like more of like a junk space where all of the stuff goes, and then like what's actually getting distributed across the Discord and potentially just even across different platforms is like these like pointers to the source of location, like a provenance area. And so I can imagine that being one approach to have like distributing. It's not like a distributed system, but it's like a distribution of the content. I have other ideas for things that we could integrate, but I'll leave that for the next one. Down, which is Grigori.
I'm not very familiar with IT infrastructure, but I have made a few observations in the last 15 minutes or so. In my view, I would start with basically refactoring this whole diagram. It seems too complicated for the situation we currently have. And in my view, it gets in the way, in a sense. Like, for example, a lot of boxes on this graph are kind of meaningless. For example, my understanding is that the new old home is just a deck. It's not some kind of a circle or something, it's just a deck. As well as don't waste the reboot, it's just a deck, it's just a piece of content somewhere. Yet it consumes a lot of space on the diagram. So it would be nice to put all these pieces of content somewhere in one place without crowding out the core infrastructure. Basically, they are not the parts of infrastructure. And at the top of the picture, there are some elements like Facebook and LinkedIn. Do we really do something with them? I kind of doubt it. So my first step would be to refactor to a bare minimum. What's really going on right about now with the number of people we have? And then I would try to simplify Discord as well. Discord structure. There are a lot of channels that are no longer active. And frankly, I don't think anybody has any idea what's going on. Does not seem so. That does not seem like anybody has a bandwidth to really at least follow the what's going on. So probably after refactoring the infrastructure graph, I would refactor Discord as well. We have a few channels that are currently active and useful, and distributed systems is one of them, online governance is another, introductions apparently active. So it's, in my view, relatively simple exercise to find those channels that are active and basically keep them, and the rest to do something with the rest, I would say so. And that will help, in my view, to make it more legible and easy to use. And I will pass it on, see who's next, to Meyer.
I think Mayor is still listen only for the minute. Oh, are you back on, Mayor?
No. What you said.
Okay. All right. I think I'm next on the list. So I think if I were thinking of this as a product, I think the one I have, I think, two big sort of areas that could use, I don't know, creative thinking and evolution. One is what I think of as the time dimension. So there's lots of ideas for like small improvements and features, whether as new services to integrate or like little bits of code we could write. But some of them kind of like almost serve like a strategic purpose, as in like they can be the core of like a new architectural direction or something. So that's kind of what I'm trying to pick up on. So one of those would be something like the profile page on the website. So the website and Discord, I think one of the reasons they're not as integrated is one is a relatively polished, relatively static thing that changes very infrequently and only changes when we deliberately do like an editing pass on it. And the other is very much more live and confusing, and lots more is happening there automatically. So it's like high tempo automatic action versus low tempo forced editorial action. So that's kind of the bridge we kind of have to connect. And I think one way to interestingly connect the two islands, so to speak, is to speed up and automate the tempo of the website side. And one particular idea that seems of high strategic value to me is, we've talked about this a few times, but something like profile state in the form of something like GitHub activity. So instead of like just name, photograph, and like a little biography from the NAC database, augment that with something that looks like the GitHub commits log or something like that. That gives people a live view of this person is active, this person has been doing this in the last few months, this person is participating in these channels or prompt tracks or projects or whatever it is, gives you a live sense of what they're up to in the community. So I think that would, and this should happen automatically, as in if you require people to log into the NAC database and update their status and say, I've done X, Y, and Z in the last few weeks, it's dead in the water, it won't work. So what you need is a way to take exhaust from Discord, I think, and detect the activity and automatically create the GitHub style little green boxes that show how active people are, and maybe update like auto-generated tags that say which channels they're active on, for example. So in my case, for example, it might say that I'm active on a weekly basis and I'm active on the rover channel and distributed systems and online governance channel. So something like that, right? Like a state snapshot of what people are up to. And I think this will, from looking from an outside point of view, as new members might see it, if you think about it, a new member joins the YakCollective typically by seeing something on Twitter, clicking and getting to the website, looking on the join page. Maybe they click on a couple of their friends' profiles and see what the friends have been up to there to get a sense of that. Then they drop in the Discord, post an introduction, and if they get a response or manage to get into one of the channels, they might get active. And this can break in many ways, but on the front end where it might break is, I think what you see on the website is neither accurate nor timely as a representation of what's going on in the community. So make it more timely and accurate. So that's one big sort of strategic vector, I think. The other on the Discord front, I think if I try to like consolidate what Commits and Gregory have both said, and this is where I think the distributed systems direction is kind of interesting. So I think it looks overly complicated, but it's not. And a lot of things that look like signal to one person might look like noise to another person. So for example, if I issue the reading list command and like 100 items scroll by, I might be trying to pick a reading for the next chat, right? So it's useful to me, even though it's a little cluttered. So there's some small improvements that could be made, like only show the last 10 items in the reading list, maybe show it in a dedicated junk space channel or whatever. So those are like small improvements. But the sort of more strategic view of that is that as a larger distributed system where only parts of it are relevant to individual users at any given time, what you want to do is, I don't know, give people more of an ability to tune their view of the whole system. And some of it already exists as Discord features, like you can, mute various channels and mute servers and so forth. But I think the muting and curation element of like customizing the UI to yourself is just not that sophisticated. So you kind of have to like make up for its deficiencies. So I don't know what the general approach here is, since it's too dependent on what Discord itself does, but maybe forums will improve that capability. But in general, maybe we can come up with a few design principles on like how to discipline whatever happens in the Discord. So I don't think like endless refactoring of the channels is the answer, because we've tried that 3 or 4 times and it gets us a little bit of marginal improvement, but it doesn't actually I don't know, put us on a continuous improvement trajectory. Because it'll always be the case that the 2 or 3 channels you're paying attention to seem like noise, everything else seems like clutter or something like that. So we need something slightly better. So I don't know, maybe a set of design principles for how bots should behave, or a different set of design principles suggesting to people how they should I don't know, manage their activity. Like if we could have, like in the introductions channel or the new user help message, something that says go through all the list of all the channels and turn on notifications for the few you pay attention to and mute everything else, or something like that. I don't know. Somehow get us behaving as a more distributed system. And beyond that, I think the outer periphery of things that are either blocks that are really content blocks like decks, or things we're integrated to but too loosely, and I don't know, in a default way, like Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook, they're not really part of our infrastructure because we have not done much customization or like weird stuff. They're more like just things we plug into in the outer ecosystem. And some of these I think deserve more attention than others, like Twitter and YouTube. Other things are kind of just there, and maybe they should be pruned or just neglected, and that's fine. But I think we should pick a couple of strategic external touch points that are worth thinking about harder. And I think the 2 big ones are probably Twitter and YouTube, mainly because we have people paying attention and doing things on those channels, and also because there's some potential for like doing more than just having an account and posting to it. So that's yeah. So to summarize, I guess on the website front, make it more active and automated somehow. On the Discord front, give people more of an ability to tune their experience. And then on the outer ecosystem, pick a couple of vectors and double down on them. So that's kind of where I think the overall direction should be. I think Anuraj is next.
Okay. I was thinking it's mostly Nathan and Mayor doing the work, and I lurk around on Sundays. So we want a lot of features, but like how do we implement it, or how do we get the manpower for it? And even for YouTube, it's mostly me, and with some help from Jenna and Mayor. So it's mostly a manpower problem. And also sometimes during discussions we have had some like how we have automation solutions, but they are pricey. So do we put in the money to get those, and then we don't know whether those would be used or not? So that is another issue I have seen. And yeah, the one thing, yeah, I think a lot of people mentioned there is we have lots of islands of like infrastructure. So we have this website, and then a lot of Roam. We have more than 100 GBs of data now for YouTube, and yeah, so they are all islands, but they are not connected. Like if we could somehow figure out how to connect those and make a more legible infrastructure, it would be great. For example, like I always wanted something like if I push to the Discord channel, like for example, I maintain a channel called Embedded Ecosystem for Rovers. Like I would like to go the links to go to Roam somehow, but right now it's not there. So that is something I would like. What else? Yeah, those are my thoughts right now. Next, I think we are done. Or is Mayor on?
Yeah, I'm on. So what I would say is the following. I think we have more hopes than we have person power, and though we talked about in general and also now on the call, it appears we only have not women. But I think the problem we have is that in order to make something that works, you have to have not only people who build it, but also people who use it and provide feedback, and then still enough people who build it and make it better. So there's two possibilities. One is to do a lot less. And if we do a lot less, so everybody will be working on that and giving feedback and so on. And the other possibility is what we're doing now and what I guess Anuraj calls islands. We have different islands. So, for example, Anuraj just mentioned the option of pushing the links to Rome. We can probably do that. But there's not enough activity to focus the people who would do it and the people who would use it in order for it to actually happen. So we're not even looking into that question, what is needed and how do we add rights into Rome and so on. And that's just an example, but it's all over. Let's, Venkatesh, you mentioned the reading list. Oh, we could show the last 10. Yeah, we could, and it's probably half an hour's work to do that. But in order for that to happen, you have to decide that it's worthwhile doing. You have to convince, let's say, me, that it's worthwhile doing. I do it, you need to debug it and say, yes, Mayor, this is what I wanted. Okay. And then we all hope that people will use it and give some sort of feedback so that next time that you want to convince me, it will actually happen. Okay. So if we only had one thing we were working on, it would happen. We have the islands, like Anuraj is saying. So all of the islands are hungry. At any given time, one of the islands, gets fed. It gets attention from users and gets attention from people building infrastructure. And we have, one of these loops where people are feeding off of each other. And then one of the two, either the infrastructure people or the users, wander away, as yaks do. And it stops. And the result is what we have here. So I don't have a solution. I just want to explain why I see it happening. So that's what I have to say.
So I think the last couple of points made by Anuraj and Mayor, one way to think about that is one reason there's this sort of mismatch between hopes and current status and the ability to actually work on like interesting ideas versus the number of ideas is, as a distributed system that's, I don't know, staffed by volunteers and like just casual users coming in and out, both on the user level and the people who work on the infrastructure, it's not like a standard product. It's not like a product made by a company where there's like investors and there's a budget and you hire engineers and you build it and there's a separate distinct class of users. So the chicken and egg loops of like attracting new quote unquote users to the product versus community from which both the users and developers are drawn, all that is very different from a company. And I think the symptom of that is that we've been trying several times and failing to treat new users onboarding the way, I don't know, companies and universities and like traditional organizations do. So we have an introductions channel. People come in, post an introduction, then they look around looking for a hook or, I don't know, foothold to actually get in. They find none. And 99% of them like flow off like a flash flood. And I think this is sort of the root cause of, islands starving, not enough user activity to give feedback, all those things trace back to that. And I think the problem is the mental model of thinking of it as like, quote unquote, onboarding outsiders. What we really should be thinking of is like abandon the, I don't know, onboarding through introductions kind of mental model and think in terms of how can we just make the whole thing much more like a public space. So there's like, a spectrum between a public space like Twitter, where anybody can go in, see what's happening and like plug in an organic way, versus a private space which has a boundary, a firewall, which you have to traverse. You have to understand how to get past the boundary and then what to do once you're on the other side. So there's this boundary thing. I don't know if we can somehow think of the Yak Collective as in between the two extremes. It's not like a public space like Twitter, but neither is it like a bounded space, like a private space with an onboarding and an introduction and process. So something like a porous, semi-permeable membrane. And that's one of the reasons I think it's very interesting to do things that have organic visibility. So I think the Yak tweet bot, for example, is really useful because it gives you a way to treat this as a semi-public space where anybody on the Discord can use the Yak tweet command and it goes out on the outer Yak Collective Twitter account. And then if there's a link, people can click. But the outer heat signature is this is actually a distributed collective Twitter account that occasionally shows you glimpses of what's going on outside. And I think that's a very effective way. It's much more effective than somebody trying to like run a marketing campaign, posting links, doing like formal newsletters and so forth. So I think we should look for more creative ideas of that type, the Yak tweet type, that make the boundary a lot more translucent and semi-permeable, and so that people can kind of drift in from all directions rather than just through the introductions channel and having to go through an onboarding process. So I'm not being very clear, but I think the basic idea is the onboarding process, the way we think of it now, is not just broken, but simply like not even wrong. That's kind of how traditional organizations think, and we should not be thinking that way. In fact, maybe here's a radical idea. Maybe we should just delete the introductions channel, like just completely delete it because it doesn't actually work the way we think it does. And instead say, how can we make the whole boundary a lot more translucent? And when people join, they should maybe be dropped into some other channel. So for example, if there's a Yak tweet from the Yak Rover project, it comes with a link or invite that drops people directly into the Rover channel. So they come directly into the island that's of interest to them, and maybe they never see anything else. So I think we need a little bit of radical thinking like that. And then I think that'll trigger a couple of virtuous cycles, which would be more people will come in and stay long enough to actually understand what's going on. And then they can plug into other loops, like maybe help develop infrastructure, maybe help provide feedback on new features. I'm trying to think of other examples where this process has worked. Like, yeah, the prompt school, I think, is a really good direction, both in general as like a area of activity and evolution, but also the way we've done it. Like the way we've attracted people to it is some of it has been people who've already been hanging around, but now they have a lower barrier to participation to actually do something. So there's been some, it's not great, but there's been some more activation of people that wasn't there before. But the other specific example I want to point out is the Fermi Gym. So the way this channel bootstrapped was, for those of you who don't know, James Jamona was running like this Zoom-based lab kind of thing where we were practicing Fermi estimates. And then he ran out of energy, and I suggested to people just come to the Yak Collective and do this in a channel there in an asynchronous, low-effort way. And they all came in, and we created the channel, and I invited them there, and I'm sort of coordinating the prompt track there. And it's actually, I think, the most consistently active, and the reason is we take turns posting prompts. So if you think about like how to analyze what happened here, it completely short-circuited the introductions mechanism. There was no marketing in the sense of like somebody on Twitter or newsletter trying to like, push this idea. It was like opportunistic. Something else was happening elsewhere that was interesting. It was then failing, and then we brought it in here to kind of continue working. And the people who joined were from there. And as far as I can tell, they haven't really explored beyond the Fermi Gym channel to the rest of the Yak Collective. They've kind of like just taken that old activity and brought it here and made a new home here. So there's something very interesting there, and it would be interesting to ask, can we do this more systematically? Can we encourage this and sort of support it in a different way? So those are the two examples I would think of as like, I don't know, seeds of Yak 2.0 infrastructure. So the Yak tweet as a mechanism, and then the Fermi Gym as a case study in something that worked completely differently from the introductions and marketing approach. Anyway, so that's just some broad thinking I'm doing about how to solve the starvation and resources problem around doing anything at all. All right, more thoughts?
I'd like to pick up on that if I can. I think, like, I want to say +1 to no intro channel. For me, like, an intro channel is just like typically like the most imaginative. Like, it's the place where like posts go to die on a Discord. But alongside that, kind of thinking along that radical line, I mean, you're kind of like, there's been not only a fixation today in like your conversation, Venkat, about like automating more frequent updates of people and members, but also kind of recurrent discussions about like what's the actual like flow for like getting information about members, like from Discord onto the website, from the website onto the Discord. And I think in many respects, like one approach could be to just kind of sidestep the whole issue of members, because in many respects, the Yak Collective has evolved from being a collective that was focused on catering towards indies and more focused on idea exploration. And I've mentioned this before, but I think one of the things that attracts a lot of people to this space is the writing that Venkat does, which is very much focused on ideas. And of course, Venkat, like, you have a personality on Twitter. Like, it's not as though like you stand alone in terms of content, but like your content is what tends to shine, the ideas there. And with the prompt school, with the more kind of educational turn, I think what you might kind of prioritize instead of people is kind of surfacing ideas. So I could imagine something like surfacing all of the like prompt responses, maybe even without like the originating prompt that compelled those responses. And the kind of incentive to join the Discord is to actually see, what are people responding to? What is this thing, this source that is generating response? Because the problem with like having a focus on members on your website is that people need to go there and actually like engage with that in some sense. And I think largely speaking, that doesn't really happen off of platforms, because there's no kind of like exchange mechanism on a static website. Like, it's like, okay, yeah, there's some people involved, and maybe I'm interested in the fact that this one person kind of maybe posted there like, a year and a half ago. But we also get people who come in saying like, can you just stop tweeting about me? Like, I think I would shift more towards the ideas and the content and the prompts and that kind of thing on a more regular cadence, and just kind of leave aside this whole notion that like the membership is actually what matters, because in reality, like, it's usually the same like 10 to 12 people at max that join these calls. And so if we can get more people more excited about the ideas, then I think that that's more of a compelling case to actually participate than people. I have other thoughts. I don't know if anyone wants to respond to that first, though.
I noticed Jenna just joined, last 15 minutes, or maybe Jenna, I don't know how much you heard, but if you have thoughts, please chime in.
Yeah, I'm glad I caught what I did so far. It was I think Commits, I heard you, and then Venkat, I heard you. Mayor, you were just finishing up, so I apologize. I think where I like where all this is going, the specific thing that's been on my mind, and I think maybe this is part of what you're talking about, is could we spin up with some ease an automation email that just surfaces the current problem and to back to how can we use this Substack or Button Down if we moved, or whoever else, other ways to, the Discord is a black hole. I noticed when I was away for 2-3 weeks on my trip, the thought of trying to catch up is kind of daunting. So I'm sympathetic to everyone who has said that all along. I'm not being completionist right now. But it means if I did want to do a prompt, it's kind of overwhelming. I'd have to spend 20 minutes even finding, what are the current prompts and how could which one would I jump in on, because, all the channels are of interest to me. So there, if that's part of what you guys were talking about, I'd be happy to help look at how to do that. I'll shut up and listen again now.
I would like to hear more reactions to Kamit's idea, which I think is an interestingly more radical extension of what I suggested. So my suggestion was, why not just delete the introductions channel and like make it more drift in from any direction and join whatever you want. And Kamit took that a step further and say, why not get rid of the whole idea of membership altogether and instead sort of like focus on ideas in some sense. I'm not quite sure what that would look like, but maybe the member directory page sort of gets deprecated and instead that becomes like, I don't know, flow of like highlighted ideas or something. So I don't know what the strawman version of that is, but I think it's an interestingly radical thought worth considering. So reactions to that?
Well, I actually, as Knitz was, oh, sorry, Mary, were you going to say something?
No, you go first. It's fine. I've been in many more of these meetings than you.
I'm going through a down cycle right now. I mean, it's just the way it is. As Knitz was talking, like it almost struck me as we could almost the website, and this would actually simplify a set of things to more of almost like a blog that was based off of Discord. And so we could we would need something that we could track. I don't know how we could track metrics of like engagement with a particular post or a particular prompt. Prompts might be easier since they're in threads. We could also look at posts that get a lot of stars or yaks or something. And then we might want to, because like sometimes people will have like multiple posts in a row. We might want to have some process that like says, okay, we'll look at this post, but then also see like, did that person post like however many X successive posts before somebody else posted something. Automatically just create blog posts of those and then have essentially a deep link back into Discord that somebody reads that and is like, oh, that's cool, and clicks on the link, and that's an invite to that particular channel. So like every channel gets an invite link, and like you see something you like, you click on the thing, you just drop right into that channel. And the existing content just gets integrated in, like they're just other blog posts. Like projects become just blog posts on those dates. And if we want to have a big project, like we want to highlight the online governance paper or something, we can just write a particular large post and drop it into that feed. And in a set of ways, that would actually make the website a lot simpler and really simplify a lot of the things that we're dealing with around it, and might actually be more useful both for people to get their head around what's hot, but also for driving. So that was my thought.
Yeah, I'm hearing what Commit says, and the question is, why do we want Discord? I mean, what is Discord giving us? What we're doing is exposing ideas and having people discuss these ideas out in the open with no, let's call it a little gatekeeping. That's exactly what Twitter, I don't know what it's called, communities is supposed to be. Anybody can watch, you can join. Prompts are the natural thing you have in Twitter. Maybe we should be working somewhere else and use Discord just as a back channel where people can make long discussions about some small percentage of the matters.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting observation. I think there are some things that we could potentially complement this idea with that might give a little more function to the Discord. So, if we think about kind of like doubling down on different platforms like Twitter, for instance, there's this bubble bot that Trust developed, and they recently collaborated with MetaLabel to develop this bot called Chorus, which basically gives Discord users the ability to basically do the same function as the Yak tweet, except instead of any individual kind of taking the mantle and deciding to push something to another platform, in this case, Twitter, basically the way it works is it's once it reaches a certain threshold of reacts, there are different triggers that you can execute. I think the most common is just pushing it to Twitter. And, you know, so that once you sort of see, it's sort of like the starboard, but like for another platform. And so that could be some way of like giving a sense to like the community for like what actually gets surfaced from this more communal space into this kind of blog type space that Nathan is describing. And I think, you know, there's this bot called Telescope that some folks have been working on, Ali Rennie from RMIT, that gives you the ability to kind of comment on different people's, you leave a Telescope react and then you can leave an annotation on their posts. And so, yeah, in some ways that's like replying to a thread in a Twitter, but I think like the real time like chat function and ability to kind of go back and see it in a larger context means that like the kind of content that is pushed is different than the kind that you might find on a platform like Twitter, where you have character constraints and different kinds of platform gravity and logistics. So I think you're right to say that like the distinction blurs a little bit. It's a little nuanced, but maybe something to continue talking about.
All right, so we are at the hour. So I think this is interesting and there's a lot more to talk about. So I propose we continue this discussion next week, and I'll take the action of like trying to synthesize what's been said today into at least a straw man proposal to think about. Even if we don't end up pivoting to that direction, I think it is actually interesting to like lay out what this radical new direction might look like, where there's activity maybe in a Twitter community feeding into a middleware community at Discord, and the whole thing fuels into a blog-like version of the static website. And there's another idea on the table that I'd like everybody to think about, which is we were talking about doing a magazine-like thing. So actually a print magazine, since Jenna and I have been working on my book as a separate project. But the idea is we could take Astonishing Stories and other like content producing things, including the governance white paper type thing, and sort of like turn that stream into kind of like a much more curated magazine-like artifact. And this gives you a natural further endpoint beyond the blog-like website. So then the sequence becomes 4 stages. There's a Twitter open community kind of space, then there's a Discord type space, then there's a website type space, and then there's a magazine. And the progression seems to be something like it becomes more polished and more slow moving and more curated as you go along that direction, with like, I don't know, ability to participate and complexity of actions peaking somewhere in the middle, something like that. So I'll take a shot at like laying this out, and we can discuss it again next week. In the meantime, yeah, post any further thoughts in the asynchronously in either the distributed systems channel, or actually, since I started the thread in general discussion for Yak 2.0 brainstorm, let's post it there. Let's try and keep thoughts collected in one thread here. All right, so see you guys next week.
Bye all, thanks.
Thank you. Bye.